My name is Samuel. I'm 60 years old, and what I'm about to share will forever change the way you see your own family. Just 3 days ago, my own son Caleb and his wife Sophie pushed my beloved Martha and me off a 90-foot cliff. As I lay there broken, every bone screaming with pain, I heard Martha's trembling breath beside me. And then I whispered the words that might have saved us. Don't move. Pretend we're dead. But even that horror wasn't the worst of it. What shattered my soul was the truth I carried inside me. The secret I had kept buried for 25 years. The secret about the night my eldest son Edward died. For decades, Martha and I thought we had built the perfect family. We woke every morning in our modest suburban home, the smell of Martha's coffee drifting through the air as birds sang in the yard. She was a teacher, her days filled with children's laughter, while I spent mine in my carpentry shop, turning raw wood into furniture that would outlive me. Her hands came home ink-stained from correcting papers, while mine came home scarred and dusty from the saw. Together, we thought we had created a life of love, of safety, of family. We had 2 boys, Edward, our firstborn, 5 years older than Caleb. Edward was the light of the house, always smiling, always helping me in the shop, always protecting his mother from even the smallest worry. Caleb was different, quiet, reserved, sometimes distant, but still, he was my son, and I loved him with every fiber of my being. On Sundays after church, we gathered around the oak table I had carved with my own hands. Edward would share his dreams of becoming an engineer, while Caleb sat silently, picking at his plate. Life was simple, and we believed it was beautiful. In the evenings, Martha and I walked the trails of our little town, hand in hand, talking about the future, about growing old together, about watching grandchildren play in our yard. I never imagined those walks were preparing me for the night I'd walk a path that almost ended in death. When Edward turned 20, everything began to change. He and Caleb argued often, their voices low in the hallway, silencing themselves when I approached. I told Martha it was just brotherly tension, but in my heart a shadow began to grow. Then came that October night 25 years ago, when Edward never came home for dinner. We searched until dawn, and when the sun rose it revealed his lifeless body at the bottom of the gorge. The police said it was an accident. Everyone believed them, everyone except me. Because I had been there, I had seen what really happened, and I had buried that truth for decades, convincing myself it was mercy. But mercy has a way of turning into poison, and now, as I lay at the bottom of another gorge, betrayed by my only surviving son, I realized that the sins of the past never stay buried. They claw their way back to destroy everything you once thought was unbreakable. Edward's funeral was the darkest day of my life. I wore the only black suit I owned, the same one I had worn to bury my father. Martha wept until her eyes were raw, her hands clutching mine as if letting go would mean losing everything. Caleb was eerily calm. He sat with dry eyes, his face unreadable. While I felt my heart being ripped apart, my youngest son stared into nothingness, and though no one else noticed, I knew what haunted that silence, because I had seen it. I had seen him with Edward that night. After Edward's death, Caleb transformed. He became helpful, attentive, even loving. He followed me into the workshop, carried things for his mother, comforted her when grief struck. To everyone else, it seemed like he was filling the void his brother left behind. To me, it was something else. It was a mask, a carefully built disguise to bury the monster that had revealed itself that night. Years passed. The wound never healed, but life forced us to move on. Caleb married Sophie, a girl from the next town. She was sweet, always smiling, always calling Martha Mom. Together they had 2 children, and for a while it felt like life had given us another chance. Sophie helped with the house. Caleb expanded his carpentry into his own business, and family dinners returned with laughter. But I now know that was all smoke and mirrors. A lie carefully crafted so that one day, when the time was right, they could finish what Caleb had started long ago. The signs began 6 months ago when Martha and I decided to update our will. We had worked for 40 years, saved every penny we could. Between the house, the land Martha inherited, and our bank accounts, we had nearly $300,000 set aside for our children and grandchildren. Caleb was the one who suggested visiting a lawyer. "Dad, Mom, you're 60 now. It's important to have everything in order." "Dare," he said, smiling the same smile that made my blood run cold. Sophie, sitting beside him, stroked Martha's hand with fingers that would one day push her toward death. We went to Albert, an old lawyer we'd known for years. He laid out the options: trusts, inheritance divisions, a traditional will. Caleb insisted he and Sophie be named sole heirs. "We'll handle the fair distribution to the kids," he said smoothly. "Besides, you'll need us when you're older. It's better if we have access to the resources to care for you properly." His words were drenched in honey, but I could taste the venom underneath. Martha hesitated, but I, fool that I was, allowed myself to be persuaded. I told myself Caleb was trying to be responsible. I told myself Sophie's kindness was genuine. I told myself lies, because the truth was too unbearable. We signed the papers, and Sophie hugged Martha tight. "Now we're officially united forever," she whispered, but her words chilled me, for forever was not what she meant. That night, as Martha cooked dinner, she looked at me with doubt in her eyes. "Samuel, did we make a mistake?" she asked. I forced a smile, kissed her forehead, and told her everything would be fine. But deep inside, I already knew the truth, and truth has a way of sharpening its claws when you ignore it too long. The weeks after signing the will were strange. Caleb and Sophie began visiting more often, but it wasn't the same as before. They didn't come for family dinners or to laugh with the grandchildren. No, every visit turned into discussions about our house, our savings, or what plans we had for old age. "Dad," Sophie said one evening as she examined our living room like a buyer at an auction, "this house is too big for 2 people. It must be so expensive to maintain. You should think about selling it while the market's hot." Martha looked at her with wounded eyes. Every corner of that home carried our memories, our children's first steps, Edward's laughter, our 40 years of love carved into the walls. "This is our home," Martha said firmly. "We're not leaving it." But I caught it, the flash of irritation in Caleb's eyes, a shadow that sent chills through me. "Mom, Dad," he said sharply, his voice harder than I'd ever heard. "You're being irrational. You're old now. If one of you falls, who's going to help you? You need us." Sophie added her false sweetness. "We just care about you. It's painful to watch you struggle with things we could handle." But her eyes, calculating, cold, betrayed the truth. That night, Martha confronted me. "Samuel, don't you see? Caleb is pushing too hard. Why is he so desperate to control our money?" I brushed my teeth in silence, trying to convince both her and myself. "He just cares about us," I said. But in my reflection, I saw my own doubt staring back at me. And then came the request that tore away the mask completely. Caleb asked for power of attorney over our finances. "Just for precaution," he said casually, as Sophie brewed tea in our kitchen like it already belonged to her. "If one of you gets sick, we can manage things without legal mess. It's for your safety." That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, listening to Martha's quiet breathing while guilt clawed at my chest. Because the truth was, I already knew what Caleb was capable of. I had known it for 25 years. The night Edward died, I followed him. He had discovered that Caleb had been stealing from our savings. At first, small sums, then thousands. Edward confronted him by the gorge. Their voices echoed in the night. I saw Edward waving the proof in his hands, shouting, "You're stealing from Mom and Dad. I'll tell them everything if you don't confess yourself." And then it happened. Caleb snapped. He screamed that Edward was always the favorite, that he'd had enough, and with both hands he shoved his brother into the abyss. I saw Edward claw at the rocks, his scream cut short as he vanished into the darkness. I wanted to run to him, to dive after him, but by the time I reached the edge, there was only silence. Caleb stood there trembling, tears streaking his face. "It was an accident, Dad. He slipped. I just defended myself. Please, please don't tell Mom." And that was the moment I damned us all. Because instead of dragging him to the police, I pulled him into my arms. I told myself I couldn't lose both sons in one night. I told myself Edward was gone, and Caleb could be saved. But in choosing silence, I became his accomplice. And now, decades later, that silence had returned to kill us. From that night onward, I carried a secret that poisoned every breath I took. Caleb promised he would return the stolen money little by little. He swore Edward's death had been a tragic accident, and like a fool, I believed him. But the money never came back. Instead, I watched as small amounts vanished from our savings year after year, and I stayed silent. Every time I looked at Martha, I felt like a traitor, because I knew I was hiding the truth that our surviving son had killed his brother. For years I told myself it was better this way. I told myself Caleb had changed, that he was building a family, that he was finally living right. But in reality, he was building a mask, and I was helping him hold it up. Then came the day I decided to look deeper. The whispers of doubt in my chest wouldn't let me rest. I quietly began investigating Caleb's finances. What I found turned my blood to ice. His carpentry business was a facade. He owed more than $150,000 to banks and suppliers. He wasn't the successful man he pretended to be. He was drowning. And I realized then, Martha and I weren't just obstacles in his way. We were his only salvation. When I showed Martha the papers, her hands trembled. She asked me through tears, "Does Sophie know?" I nodded. I had seen how Sophie guided their conversations, how she asked about our life insurance, the value of our home, our savings. Those weren't questions of love. They were calculations of how much our deaths were worth. Then came the phone call that confirmed our worst fear. Caleb's voice was cheerful, too cheerful. "Dad," he said, "Mom and I were talking. We think it'd be beautiful to celebrate your 40th anniversary up in the mountains. Just a family hike, some pictures, a perfect day together." Martha's eyes met mine, both of us frozen in terror. We knew it wasn't an invitation. It was an execution date. Still, I forced my voice to sound calm. "That's thoughtful, son. Let us think about it, and call you tomorrow." After I hung up, Martha whispered, "He's going to take us there to kill us, just like Edward." I nodded. The plan was clear. A cliff, a staged accident, 2 grieving survivors to inherit everything. That night, neither of us slept. We lay in bed, holding each other like it was the last time, whispering prayers into the dark. By morning, I had decided. "We'll go," I told Martha, "but we'll be ready. I'll hide my phone, record everything. If we survive, we'll have proof, and if we don't—" My voice broke. "Then at least the truth will not die with us." I wrote a letter to my sister Margaret, explaining everything, Edward's murder, Caleb's debts, and our suspicion that he was planning to kill us. I sealed it, hid it among our important papers, and prayed she'd one day find it if we didn't return. That Friday night, Martha cooked dinner, but neither of us could eat. We sat at the table where Edward once did his homework, where Caleb once smiled with innocence, and all we could feel was the crushing weight of betrayal. I looked at Martha and whispered, "If something happens to me, know that these 40 years with you have been the best of my life." She held my hand, tears in her eyes, and whispered back, "Then we'll survive together. Or not at all." The morning of the hike dawned with a sky too clear, too cruel. Caleb arrived whistling like it was a holiday, Sophie radiant as a bride, and I knew we were walking straight into death's open arms. During breakfast, Caleb spread a map on the table, his eyes gleaming. "It's a beautiful trail," he said. "Leads to a lookout where you can see the whole valley. They say the view is spectacular." Spectacular. That word slithered like poison through my ears. I knew what he meant. It would be the last view Martha and I would ever see. Sophie chimed in with her rehearsed sweetness. "It's easy enough, even kids can hike it. Nothing dangerous at all." Her lies cut like blades. I checked my phone, hidden carefully in my pocket, and already recording. If we didn't make it back, this would be our voice from the grave. The 2-hour drive to the mountains was unbearable. Sophie sang along to cheerful songs on the radio. Caleb obeyed every traffic law, careful not to ruin his perfect plan with an accident. Martha's hand found mine in silence, both of us squeezing so tightly it hurt. We knew this wasn't a trip, it was a funeral procession. When we arrived, the trailhead greeted us with tall trees, birdsong, and the river's distant roar. But for me, it wasn't beauty, it was a stage built for betrayal. Sophie skipped ahead with her camera, laughing, pointing at wildflowers. "Oh, look at these! Samuel, Martha, let's take a photo." She snapped pictures, all smiles, while behind us Caleb lingered, his eyes on our backs, every step calculated. "Doing all right back there, Dad? Mom?" he asked, pretending to care. Each word dripped with venom hidden under honey. After an hour, we reached a steeper incline. My legs grew heavy. Martha struggled for breath. Caleb knew. He had chosen this trail to exhaust us, to make us weak for when the time came. Then Sophie called out, her voice bright as a child's. "Oh, look at that cliff! The view must be incredible. Let's climb up there for some photos." My blood turned to ice. That was it, the execution site. The cliff stood 90 feet high, the rocks loose, the gorge below filled with jagged stones. If someone slipped, there would be no chance of survival. No witnesses, no escape. I forced a casual tone. "That looks dangerous for people our age," I said. But Caleb was already walking toward it, his backpack full of safety equipment that he never intended to use. "Come on, Dad," he said with a grin that made my skin crawl. "It'll only take a few minutes. The photos will be unforgettable." Martha squeezed my hand, her eyes wide with terror. My phone kept recording in my pocket. We climbed. Each step on the loose stones felt like walking closer to our graves. At the top, the valley spread before us. Under other circumstances, it would have been breathtaking, but now it was only a coffin with no lid. "Stand here, with the valley behind you," Sophie called, camera ready. We obeyed, hugging each other while she snapped picture after picture. The flashes felt like lightning bolts announcing a storm. Then Caleb stepped closer. "One more," he said smoothly. "But step back a little. The view will be perfect." One more step. One step closer to death. Martha's eyes met mine. We both knew. The time had come. Martha and I stepped back, our heels grazing the edge of the abyss. Sophie raised the camera, but her eyes betrayed her. The mask was gone. Her voice, no longer sweet, sliced through the air. "Smile. This will be your last photo." Caleb lunged forward, both hands outstretched, ready to shove us into the void. But I had been waiting for this moment. At the last second, I grabbed his wrist with all the strength I had left and pulled. "If we're going to die, you're coming with us," I roared, my voice carrying 25 years of buried guilt and fury. For a breathless instant, all four of us, Martha, Sophie, Caleb, and I, teetered on the edge of that cliff in a grotesque dance between life and death. Sophie shrieked, clawing at her husband, trying to pull him back, but the weight of us all was too much. The ground gave way beneath our feet. We fell together. The air howled around us, the world spinning in chaos. I thought of Edward, my firstborn, falling into the gorge all those years ago, his scream echoing in the night. I understood in that instant the terror he had felt, the betrayal he had tasted. The impact came like thunder. My bones cracked, the pain indescribable, blood filling my mouth. For a moment I thought it was over, that Caleb had finally succeeded. But then, through the haze of agony, I remembered my plan. I forced myself still. My lips barely moved as I whispered to Martha, "Play dead." We lay there, motionless, broken bodies in the gorge, and soon I heard them, groans of pain. Caleb and Sophie had survived too. "Sophie, are you okay?" Caleb's voice was cracked, weak. "My leg. I think it's broken," she whimpered. "What about them?" I kept my eyes wide and unfocused, my breathing shallow, willing myself into the role of a corpse. Caleb crawled closer, his breath ragged. After a long pause, he muttered, "They're dead, both of them, eyes open, but not breathing." Relief coated his voice. "Perfect," Sophie whispered, her tone dripping with satisfaction. "It worked. Except we fell too. But at least we don't have to pretend to love them anymore." Her bitter laugh cut through the air like a knife. I wanted to scream, to strike, to drag them into the grave they had dug for us. But I stayed still. I let their words sink into my recording device, the only weapon we had left. They argued about crawling for help, about the story they would tell. "Remember," Caleb reminded her, his voice trembling but firm. "Dad slipped on a rock. He grabbed Mom, and they both fell. We tried to save them, but we fell too. We're the traumatized survivors of a tragic accident." "I know," Sophie replied, her voice sharp. "We've practiced this 100 times. Poor us. We lost our dear in-laws in a horrible accident." Their voices faded as they dragged themselves away, crawling toward their salvation. But for me and Martha, salvation lay in silence. We had to remain corpses until the right moment. Because this wasn't the end. No, this was just the beginning of justice. Silence returned to the gorge after Caleb and Sophie crawled away. The only sounds were the rush of the distant river and Martha's ragged breathing beside me. My body screamed with pain. My left leg was twisted at an unnatural angle, my ribs stabbing with every breath. But I turned my head ever so slightly toward her. "Martha," I whispered, my voice barely audible, "are you alive?" Her lips trembled, blood staining her chin. "Yes, but hurt. So badly." I forced myself to stay calm. "We have to hold on. We have proof now, the recording. If we can survive, we can end this." Hours passed like years. The sun moved across the sky, shadows stretching, and the gorge grew colder. My mind wandered to that night decades ago, the night Edward died. I had hidden the truth from Martha all these years, but lying here at death's door, I couldn't carry it anymore. "Martha," I rasped, "before it's too late, I have to tell you everything." She turned her head weakly, eyes wide. The night Edward died. He came to me with proof, bank statements. Caleb had been stealing from us, at first little, then more. Edward said he'd confront him if Caleb didn't confess. I followed him, afraid of what might happen. When I reached the gorge, I saw them. Edward yelling, Caleb denying everything. And then, my voice cracked. Caleb pushed him. It wasn't an accident. He killed his brother. I saw it. Tears welled in Martha's eyes, mixing with blood and dirt. "Why didn't you tell me?" she sobbed weakly. I swallowed the guilt that had burned me for decades. Because when I reached Caleb, he was crying, shaking, begging me to believe it was an accident, and I couldn't lose both sons in one night. So I buried the truth, and every day since, I've lived as his accomplice. Martha's tears flowed silently, but her hand reached for mine. Even in her pain, even in her heartbreak, she still held me. That was the kind of woman she was. Just then, distant voices echoed above us. Caleb and Sophie had found help. My heart pounded. Soon rescuers would arrive, and Caleb, with his poisonous tongue, would spin his story of tragedy and survival. But we had something he didn't know, his own confession recorded on my phone. The voices grew louder. Helicopter blades thudded in the distance. Ropes clinked as rescuers began their descent. Martha squeezed my hand, her eyes burning with a fragile hope. "Samuel," she whispered, "if we're rescued now, they'll try again. We have to wait. Wait for the right moment." She was right. If Caleb and Sophie realized we were alive, they'd finish what they started before the truth ever reached the light. So when the rescuers' boots hit the ground beside us, I forced myself to remain still. My body begged to cry out for help, but I held my breath shallow, my pulse faint. I would be the dead man Caleb believed I was, until it was time to rise again and bury him with the truth. The rescuers knelt beside us, their voices sharp and urgent. I felt rough hands on my neck searching for a pulse. One of them spoke quickly into his radio. This man still alive, critical, but alive. The woman, faint pulse, very weak. Perfect. They believed we were half in the grave. That was exactly what we needed. I heard Sophie's wailing above, her performance flawless. "Oh God, I can't believe this happened. We were just taking pictures. They slipped. It was so fast." Her cries were like daggers in my ears, because I knew she was already rehearsing the speech she'd give to the police, to the news, to anyone who would listen. Caleb added his own poisoned honey. We tried to save them, but we fell too. "Please, please save them," he begged with a voice so broken, anyone would think he was the world's most loving son. The rescuers bought it. If I hadn't lived the truth, I would have believed it myself. As they strapped Martha and me to stretchers, I kept my eyes closed, fighting every instinct to scream out in pain. My phone was still hidden, still recording everything. If nothing else, that would save us. We were lifted, carried upward, inch by inch, ropes straining as the rescuers pulled us from the gorge. Sophie's fake sobs echoed above us, and Caleb's voice carried, trembling with false devotion. "Mom, Dad, please hold on." At the top, the medics rushed us to the helicopter. I could hear Caleb and Sophie behind us, their act perfect, the grieving son and daughter-in-law, shaken survivors of tragedy. I wanted to rise from the stretcher right then, point at them, and scream the truth. But I knew we needed patience. We needed to let them believe they had won, just long enough for justice to wrap its chains around them. Inside the helicopter, paramedics worked frantically over me and Martha. Oxygen masks pressed to our faces. IV lines slipped into our arms. I heard oaths. 10 of them mutter, "Vitals are strange, stronger than expected for patients this close to death. Must be trauma responses." They had no idea I was clinging to life by sheer will and by sheer fury. When we arrived at the hospital, chaos erupted. Doctors shouted orders, nurses hurried, lights blinded my half-shut eyes. I stayed limp, forcing my body to remain in the role of the dying. Then it happened. Caleb and Sophie asked to see us. Just to say goodbye, they told the doctor. Permission was granted. Their footsteps crept toward my bed. I felt Caleb's hand close around mine. His touch made my skin crawl. He leaned close, his breath hot against my ear, and whispered words that made my blood run cold. "I hope you've learned your lesson, Dad. You should have never asked questions about our finances. Some truths are better left buried, just like Edward." My heart nearly burst from my chest. He had said Edward's name. He had confessed, and he didn't know a nurse was standing nearby, her eyes wide with shock as she heard every word. For 25 years, I had carried the truth of Edward's murder alone. But in that moment, Caleb had confessed with his own lips, and this time I wasn't the only witness. The nurse's name tag read Inez. Her eyes widened as Caleb's words slipped into the air like venom. She froze, her hands clutching the rail of my bed. She knew what she had just heard wasn't grief, it was a confession. Sophie's voice hissed beside him, low but sharp. "Caleb, what did you say about Edward?" He stiffened. "Nothing. I just meant... Well, Dad always wondered what really happened. Doesn't matter now." But it did matter, and Inez knew it. As they left the room, Inez leaned close to me. Her whisper was so soft only I could hear. "Sir, if you can hear me, move your hand." Every muscle in my body screamed, but I forced my index finger to twitch. Inez gasped, her eyes shining with both fear and resolve. "Oh my God, you're pretending." She quickly regained her composure, checking my monitors as though nothing had happened. Then she whispered again, "If you're in danger from those people, move 3 times. With all the strength I had left, I moved my finger once, twice, 3 times. Her face hardened. "Understood. Don't worry. I'll get help." Minutes later, she returned with the chief doctor and 2 police officers. One of them, a middle-aged man with sharp eyes, introduced himself quietly. "Detective Harris, you're safe now. Can you open your eyes?" Slowly, painfully, I let my lids lift. Light stabbed my vision, but I forced myself to focus on their faces. Relief washed over Inez's expression. The detective leaned in, voice steady but urgent. "We know you're in danger. Tell us what happened." My voice came out hoarse, a broken whisper, but the words carried the weight of decades. "My son, Caleb, and his wife Sophie, they pushed us. They killed Edward 25 years ago, and now they tried to finish us." The detective nodded grimly, scribbling in his notepad. "We'll need evidence." My heart pounded as I rasped. My phone, in my pocket. It recorded everything. Thieves out. Air plans. Their words. Their lies. The doctor carefully retrieved the device, handing it to the officer. Harris scrolled through the files, his expression darkening as he listened. Then he looked up at me, his eyes burning with certainty. "This is more than enough." Meanwhile, in the waiting room, Caleb and Sophie sat playing their parts. The devastated children, accepting condolences, rehearsing their innocence. They had no idea the ground beneath their feet was crumbling. The detective turned back to me. "Stay calm, Mr. Black. We'll handle this. You and your wife are under protection now. They won't touch you again." For the first time in 25 years, I felt the crushing weight of silence begin to lift. The truth was finally out. My son's mask was about to shatter, and this time he wouldn't escape. The hours that followed were a blur of flashing lights, hurried footsteps, and the cold efficiency of justice finally awakening. Detective Harris listened carefully to the recordings from my phone, his face growing grimmer with each passing minute. When the final file ended, with Sophie whispering that she was glad she wouldn't have to pretend to love us anymore, he looked at me and Martha with eyes like steel. "This is clear premeditation. You've given us the rope, Mr. Black. Now we'll hang them with it." Meanwhile, Caleb and Sophie sat unsuspecting in the waiting area, their act still perfect. Sophie clutched tissues to her eyes, murmuring about poor Mom and Dad, while Caleb's voice broke as he told a nurse how much he loved us. If I hadn't known the truth, I might have believed them, but I had carried that truth in my chest for 25 years, and now it was about to destroy them. The detective gathered his officers. Warrants were signed within hours, swifter than I thought possible. Harris positioned his men discreetly around the hospital lobby. Through the window of my room, I saw them moving into place, their hands hovering near their holsters. Then came the voice I had waited decades to hear, firm, cold, unrelenting. "Caleb Black, Sophie Black, you are under arrest for the murder of Edward Black and the attempted murder of Samuel and Martha Black." The silence that followed was deafening. Then Sophie shrieked, her voice slicing through the air. "What are you talking about? We're the victims here. Our parents died in an accident." The officer's reply was calm, devastating. "Your parents are alive, and they've provided complete evidence of your crimes." From my window, I watched as Caleb's face drained of color. His mask slipped for the first time. His scream echoed through the hall. "That's impossible. We saw them die. They were dead." His words were recorded, every syllable adding another nail in his coffin. Panic took hold. Sophie turned on him in an instant, tears replaced by fury. "It was all your idea, Caleb. You forced me into this." And Caleb, desperate, spat back venom. You were the one who picked the cliff, Sophie. You planned every detail. Their alliance, built on lies and blood, shattered in seconds. Each one clawed at the other, desperate to save their own skin, while the officers locked the cuffs around their wrists. Detective Harris returned to my room an hour later, his expression weary but resolute. They're in custody. Their confessions, both to you and to each other, have sealed their fate. But there's something else you need to know. My chest tightened. What else? He laid a folder on my lap. Inside were forged bank documents, my signature, copied perfectly. Your son has been stealing from you for years. More than $75,000 siphoned off quietly. If you had died, he would have had immediate access to all your resources. He wasn't just desperate, he was drowning, and he decided you were his lifeline. I closed my eyes, the betrayal heavier than my injuries. Caleb hadn't seen us as parents, he'd seen us as currency, and for that he had murdered his brother and nearly murdered us. But his time was up. The days after their arrest passed in a haze of interviews, signatures, and endless questions from detectives, lawyers, and even reporters who swarmed the hospital once the story broke. The papers called it the most horrifying family betrayal of the decade. Strangers we had never met spoke our names with pity and shock, while Martha and I sat in our hospital beds, grappling with wounds deeper than broken bones. My sister Margaret arrived first, rushing into the room with tears streaming down her face. She embraced Martha, then me, whispering through sobs, "I always knew something wasn't right with Caleb after Edward's death, but I never imagined this." Her words brought comfort and shame in equal measure. Comfort that someone had seen the signs. Shame that I had silenced them all by carrying the truth alone. Detective Harris returned with updates. "The case is strong," he assured us. "Between the recordings, the financial records, and their confessions during the arrest, it will be nearly impossible for them to walk free. But—" he hesitated, his jaw tightening. "But what?" I asked. "Their lawyers are pushing for a plea deal. They'll try to claim it was a crime of passion, driven by financial pressure, not premeditation. If a jury buys that, they could get lighter sentences." My blood boiled. Crime of passion? They planned this for weeks. They bought equipment, chose the perfect spot, rehearsed their story. That's not passion. That's calculation. The detective nodded. "I agree. But courts are complicated. That's why your testimony will be critical. The thought of standing in court, looking Caleb in the eye, reliving every wound, every betrayal, it made my stomach twist. But I knew what had to be done. For Edward, for Martha, for the grandchildren Caleb and Sophie had left behind. 3 weeks later, Martha and I were finally discharged. We returned to our home, walking into rooms that suddenly felt unfamiliar. The breakfast dishes we hadn't washed before that cursed hike still sat in the sink. The flowers Sophie had placed on our table were wilted and dead. Time in that house had frozen the moment our lives shattered. That first night back, Martha lay beside me in the bed we had shared for decades. Her voice was quiet, fragile. "Samuel, do you think we'll ever be happy again?" I kissed her forehead and whispered the only truth I could cling to. "I don't know, but we're alive, and for the first time in 25 years, we don't have to live with secrets." 6 months later, the trial began. On the day I took the stand, I looked straight into Caleb's eyes for the first time since his arrest. There was no remorse in them, no regret, only the cold, calculating emptiness of a man who had worn a mask his entire life. When I finished my testimony, I addressed him directly, my voice breaking but strong. "Caleb, you are no longer my son. My son died the night you killed Edward. What sat in his place for the last 25 years was a monster I helped create by staying silent. But today that silence ends." The courtroom was silent, every eye on us. For the first time in decades, I felt the chains of guilt snap loose. The truth had finally been spoken. The jury deliberated for 3 long days. Each hour felt like a lifetime, but when they returned, their verdict was clear. Guilty. Caleb Black, my son in blood but not in spirit, was convicted of first-degree murder for Edward's death, and first-degree attempted murder for what he had tried to do to Martha and me. Sophie received the same fate, convicted as an accomplice. Both were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. When the judge's gavel struck, the sound echoed through me like the closing of a coffin lid. My son, the boy I had once held in my arms, the boy whose lies I had protected for decades, was gone forever. In his place stood a murderer, shackled and defeated. 1 year has passed since that day. Martha and I are still healing, both inside and out. My leg aches when it rains, and her shoulder has never fully recovered. But the deepest wounds aren't in our bodies, they're in our hearts. We've begun the process of adopting Caleb and Sophie's children, our grandchildren. They are innocent, untouched by their parents' poison. Each night when I tuck them into bed, I tell them stories about their Uncle Edward, the brother they never knew. I tell them about his kindness, his honesty, his dreams. I want them to know that goodness existed in this family, even if it was stolen too soon. Sometimes when the house is quiet, I sit in my workshop. The smell of sawdust fills the air, just as it always has. I run my hands over the wood, carving shapes, trying to create something pure from a life shattered by betrayal. I think of Edward, of the promise he once made to take care of us when we grew old. And I think of Caleb, the son I saved that night by burying the truth, only to watch him become the very monster I feared. Do I regret it? Every day. My silence gave him 25 more years to sharpen his lies, to grow bold, to believe he was untouchable. If I had spoken then, Edward might still be dead, but at least Caleb wouldn't have lived long enough to try and destroy us too. Now, as I hold my grandchildren close, I whisper the lesson carved into my soul. Secrets fester, lies breed monsters, and silence is a slow poison. So if you hear my story, take this warning. Don't bury the truth. Don't protect the guilty out of fear or love, because one day that silence may rise up, dressed in the face of your own blood, and try to finish you. Martha and I survived the cliff. We survived the betrayal, and we will raise these children with love that is real, not poisoned by greed. As for Caleb and Sophie, their prison bars are the only inheritance they will ever know, and that, I suppose, is justice. If you've made it this far, tell me in the comments where you're listening from, because I want to know how far my story has traveled. Don't forget to subscribe, because next time, I'll share with you another tale of betrayal, revenge, and the twisted faces hidden behind the word family. Until then, hold your loved ones close, and never ignore the shadows that linger in their smiles.